Hey guys, thanks for joining me for part one of the sponsored series of videos for DJI's RS3 gimbal. This is the new update to the RS2 and the RSC2 gimbals in DJI's professional gimbal line. I'm going to be breaking down some of the shots here that I did in my showcase film that I posted a little while ago on my YouTube channel. When I was making that film, I did some pretty tricky shots that pushed the limits of this gimbal, and what I'm going to do here is show you the BTS behind the scenes footage from the film, as well as recreating some of the movements and breaking down how I did them in this studio setting so it's easier for you to learn. And if you like what you see here, you might want to check out the Gimbal Masterclass, which is a course in my online film school, Unscripted Studio. If you want to learn more about that, just check out the description of this video. There will be a link right there for you to click. First, some basic gear specs. I used the Sony a7S III and FX3 cameras sort of interchangeably throughout this shoot. The lenses I used were the Viltrox 50mm f1.8, the Sony 16 to 35 f4G, this is the new smaller G Master lens from Sony, and the Samyang 18mm f2.8 wide-angle lens. I used a magnetic variable neutral density filter. This is the Kenko Pro 1D Plus, part of their Instant Action series. And for a few shots, I used a monopod as an extension pole. Okay, that's all the gear I used. Let's go ahead and get started. The first scene I want to talk about here is the bicycle scene. This is a lateral tracking shot of the bicycle where the camera is moving approximately the same speed as the bike. For this one, I didn't use this briefcase handle. This normally goes here, but I didn't use it. The lens I used was my Viltrox 50mm f1.8, and the reason I used this lens was because I wanted a longer focal length to make the motion seem a little bit faster. When you're filming a subject that's moving across the frame, moving from left to right or right to left, longer lenses will enhance that sense of motion, and wider lenses will make it feel like everything's going a bit slower. Now, this rule is opposite if the subject is moving toward or away from the camera. If your subject is moving toward you or away, then wider lenses will make it seem like they're moving faster, and longer lenses will make it seem like they're moving slower. My gimbal was in all lock mode. That's the chicken head mode that you see right here. It doesn't follow my pan, tilt, or roll. The quickest, easiest way to enter all lock mode on most of DJI's gimbals is to press down this trigger button in the front, just like I'm doing. Hold down that trigger. The other way to do it is to flip the side switch down to FPV, bottom position, then go into custom and click the pencil icon in the upper right-hand screen, and then disable tilt, roll, and pan. And that will put you in all lock mode, just like you see here. Now I'll show you my body position in the shot. I pointed the camera at the subject, the bicycle, and then I crouched down a little bit lower than normal, and I turned myself to the side, to the direction the bike would be going. So the bike was going to go this direction, I pointed my feet in that direction, and because the gimbal's in all lock mode, the lens stayed pointed at my subject. Then I ran forward, but I didn't do a normal run. I did my ninja run, where my shoulders don't go up and down very much as I run forward. Because the gimbal will compensate for this kind of shake, pan, tilt, roll shake, but it won't compensate for up and down bouncing. That's up to you. So this is something you have to practice. You have to sort of imagine that you have a glass of water on each shoulder and you're trying not to spill that glass as you run. Two major mistakes you want to avoid when you're doing a shot like this. First of all, don't hold your gimbal in flashlight mode. They'll stress the motors more, which means that it won't stabilize as well. And it's also more off balance for you because the gimbal's kind of way out here in front instead of being tight in close to your body. The second major mistake that people make is instead of running forward like I demonstrated, they'll try to sort of run to the side like they're doing a strafing movement. And this kind of movement is very unsteady. So no matter what direction the camera's facing, you want to try to keep your feet facing forward. For this next shot in the bicycle scene, my subject was behind me and I faced my lens straight backwards. So lens facing backwards toward my subject, and I was faced forward, and I rotated the screen of my camera so that I could see what I was shooting, and I ran forward. Another general tip about gimbal operation, don't just look at your LCD screen, you also need to be aware of your environment. So what I do is I'll check the screen, then I check around me, then I check the screen and back around me. It's a bit of a tricky skill to master without getting disoriented, but it is really important to practice because otherwise you will trip and fall and you can injure yourself and break your camera pretty easily. So just make sure you don't lose awareness of your environment while you shoot. The next shot I did for the bicycle scene was in FPV mode. So that means you slide this slider on the side of the gimbal down to the bottom position, and if it's not already set this way, you want to go into your follow mode settings and choose FPV at that point. My follow speed was medium, and I held the gimbal in just one hand, ran behind the bicycle, and then I orbited around her. I actually had to run faster than she was biking. I used my 50mm lens for this shot, just like the other bicycle shots, and that makes it actually a very, very difficult shot to keep framed. If you want to do a similar kind of shot but make it easier on yourself, just go wider on the lens. So you could go to 35 or 24 or even 18. The wider lens you use, the easier it becomes to frame your subject. You may be wondering how I kept that shot in focus. Well, thankfully, the Sony a7S III and the FX3 have a really good autofocus system that is especially good at detecting faces. So as long as I have a clear subject in my foreground that's centered and there's a human face involved, the autofocus tends to be pretty reliable. The next scene we're going to talk about here is the violin scene. For this scene, I held my gimbal in flashlight mode. So flashlight mode is where the handle of the gimbal is horizontal, parallel to the ground, and it feels a lot lighter weight. It's a lot less stressful on your arm because the gimbal is well balanced. Flashlight mode is really the best if you're trying to get down to ground level and then come back up to around chest level. That's where flashlight mode really works well. But you should be aware that it's not the most efficient mode for the motors of the gimbal. That means you won't get the best stabilization. So I usually don't try to run very much in flashlight mode. Usually I use it for situations where I'm just walking, especially on smoother surfaces. I also had my gimbal in FPV mode for most of these shots. So this is FPV mode. It follows the pan, the tilt, and the roll, and that gives me complete freedom in my movement. So it doesn't feel robotic. It feels a lot more organic than the pan follow or the pan tilt follow modes. I wanted to be able to flow and improvise my shots as the violinist performed because I was trying to emulate the feeling of her music and her mood as she played the instrument. So I consider the FPV mode to be the most artistic mode to use a gimbal in because it gives you the most freedom. The lens I used here was the Sony 16-35 f4 G Master lens. This is their new, smaller 16-35, and it's great for using on gimbals because it's so compact. And the great thing about both that Sony 16-35 and this Tamron 17-28 is that they don't extend or contract as you zoom, which means that you don't have to rebalance your gimbal when you change the focal length. That's something that's really important to look for, by the way, if you're going to use a zoom lens on a gimbal. You want to use a zoom lens that doesn't get bigger or smaller as you zoom it. This shot you see here was zoomed out all the way to 16mm for a super wide angle look. I started really close to the violin and then I crouch walked backwards, lowering my height as I moved away from her. The reason I do a crouch walk instead of just lowering my arm is because if you move your core like that, the shot stays steadier than if you just move your arm. Arms are further from your body, further from your core, so they tend to shake more. The center of your body is the most steady. So the closer you keep the gimbal to the center of your body as you do your movement, the steadier your shot will be. For this shot, I zoomed in to 35mm and I walked backwards in all lock mode as the violinist walked toward me. I just walked away from her as she walked toward me. And I filmed it at 60 frames a second so I could slow it down in post for a slow motion effect. Now let's talk about this bridge shot. So to do this shot, I had my gimbal in 3D Roll 360 mode. So that means that side switch all the way down to FPV, follow mode, scroll over to 3D Roll 360. In 3D Roll 360 mode, the camera will continue to spin as long as you hold down that joystick, and you can also tilt and you can pan. So that allows you to do some really complicated movement. The lens I used here was the Sony 16-35 f4, zoomed out all the way to 16mm. I wasn't actually running in this shot, I was just kind of crouch walking really fast. But the reason that it looks pretty fast in the final shot was because I was filming on a narrow walkway with the wide angle lens moving forward. Lens selection is really important for enhancing the sense of speed in your shots. In this case, I was moving down the bridge, so using a wide angle lens made it feel faster. Okay, thanks for watching. This was part 1 of my tutorial series, but there will be a part 2. So please click like and subscribe, and also that notification bell so that you know as soon as I release it. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.